Sarah's life had always been a simple one. She grew up in a small town where everyone knew each other, where her biggest worries were school assignments and what dress to wear for prom. Her family was close-knit, with Sunday dinners at Grandma's house being the highlight of the week. But that was before everything changed, before she met him. It all started on a sunny day, one of those rare perfect days where the sky was a brilliant blue, and the air was warm but not too hot. Sarah was out with her friends, laughing as they walked through the town square. That's when she saw him. He was standing by the fountain, a tall man with dark hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through her. He wasn't someone from town, Sarah was sure of that. She would have remembered someone like him. He had an aura about him, something mysterious that made her stop in her tracks. Her friends noticed her distraction and teased her, but Sarah just smiled and shrugged it off. A few days later, Sarah saw him again. This time, he was in the local coffee shop, sitting in the corner with a book in his hands. She hesitated for a moment before walking over to him. "Hi," she said, trying to sound casual. "I've seen you around. Are you new in town?" He looked up at her, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You could say that," he replied. "I'm just passing through." Sarah introduced herself, and they chatted for a while. His name was Ethan, and he told her he was traveling, exploring small towns across the country. There was something about him that drew Sarah in, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Maybe it was the way he spoke, his voice calm and steady, or the way he looked at her, as if she was the only person in the room. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and Ethan grew closer. They spent their evenings walking through the town, talking about everything and nothing. Sarah found herself falling for him, his charm and mysterious nature making her feel alive in a way she never had before. But there was something about him that also made her uneasy, something she couldn't quite shake. One evening, as they were sitting by the lake, Ethan turned to her, his expression serious. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you," he said. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" "I'm not who you think I am," he began, his voice low. "I've done things in my past, things I'm not proud of. But I've changed, Sarah. I've changed because of you." Sarah was silent for a moment, processing his words. "What do you mean?" she asked finally. "I've hurt people, Sarah. I've done things to survive, things that haunt me every day. But being with you, it's made me want to be better. I want to be better for you." Sarah's mind was racing. She didn't know what to think. The man she had fallen for was confessing to a dark past, one that she knew nothing about. But she couldn't deny the feelings she had for him. "I don't care about your past, Ethan," she said finally. "All I care about is who you are now." Ethan looked at her with something like relief in his eyes. "Thank you, Sarah," he whispered. "You have no idea how much that means to me." But things began to change after that night. Ethan became more possessive, more controlling. He would get angry if Sarah talked to other men, even if it was just a casual conversation. He started showing up at her house unannounced, insisting on knowing where she was at all times. Sarah tried to brush it off, telling herself that it was just because he cared about her, but the uneasy feeling in her gut grew stronger. One night, after a particularly intense argument, Sarah decided she needed some space. She told Ethan she needed time to think, to figure out what she wanted. Ethan didn't take it well. He accused her of wanting to leave him, of not caring about him the way he cared about her. Sarah tried to calm him down, but nothing she said seemed to work. In the end, she walked away, hoping that some time apart would help clear her mind. The next morning, Sarah woke up to find her phone flooded with messages from Ethan. Some were apologetic, pleading with her to forgive him, while others were angry, accusing her of betraying him. Sarah felt a knot of anxiety in her stomach. She didn't know what to do. She cared about Ethan, but his behavior was becoming more and more erratic. That evening, as Sarah was getting ready for bed, she heard a noise outside her window. Her heart raced as she walked over to the window and looked out. There, standing in the shadows, was Ethan. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a wild desperation that sent a shiver down her spine. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I had to see you," he replied, his voice strained. "I can't lose you, Sarah. I won't lose you." Sarah felt a wave of fear wash over her. She knew she had to get out of there. "Ethan, you need to leave," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "This isn't okay." But Ethan didn't move. Instead, he took a step closer to the window. "You don't understand, Sarah. I love you. I love you so much that I can't let you go." Before Sarah could react, Ethan grabbed her arm through the open window, pulling her towards him. She tried to scream, but his hand was over her mouth before she could make a sound. Panic surged through her as she struggled against him, but Ethan was too strong. He dragged her out of the window and into the darkness, his grip tight and unyielding. Sarah's mind was racing, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew she was in danger. She tried to fight back, but Ethan's grip only tightened. "Stop fighting me, Sarah," he hissed in her ear. "I'm doing this for you. I'm doing this because I love you." Ethan took Sarah to an old cabin deep in the woods, far away from the town. It was a place she had never been before, a place that felt isolated and suffocating. He kept her there, refusing to let her leave, insisting that it was for her own good. "I'm protecting you, Sarah," he told her over and over again. "The world out there is dangerous. People will hurt you, but I won't. I'll keep you safe." But Sarah didn't feel safe. She felt trapped, like a bird in a cage, unable to spread her wings. Ethan's love, which had once felt like a warm embrace, now felt like a chain around her neck, pulling her down into darkness. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah's hope of escape began to fade. Ethan kept her isolated, cut off from the outside world. He controlled every aspect of her life, from what she ate to when she slept. He would shower her with affection one moment, only to turn cold and distant the next. The humiliation was the worst part. Ethan would belittle her, telling her that she was nothing without him, that no one else would ever love her the way he did. He would force her to say things, to admit things that weren't true, just to prove her loyalty to him. "You belong to me, Sarah," he would say, his voice low and menacing. "You'll never leave me, because no one else will ever want you." Sarah felt her spirit breaking, piece by piece. She tried to hold on to the memories of her old life, to the person she used to be, but they felt distant, like a dream she could no longer remember. But even in her darkest moments, there was a small part of her that refused to give up. A part of her that knew this wasn't the end, that she couldn't let Ethan win. She began to plan, to think of ways she could escape, even if the chances were slim. One night, while Ethan was asleep, Sarah saw her chance. He had forgotten to lock the door, a mistake he had never made before. Her heart pounded in her chest as she quietly slipped out of bed, careful not to wake him. She moved slowly, her hands trembling as she reached for the door handle. She couldn't believe this was happening, that she was finally going to escape. But as she turned the handle, it creaked, the sound loud in the silent room. Ethan stirred in his sleep, and Sarah froze, her breath catching in her throat. For a moment she thought he was going to wake up, but then he settled back into his pillow, still asleep. Sarah exhaled slowly, then continued turning the handle. The door opened, and she slipped out into the cool night air. She didn't stop to think, didn't stop to look back. She just ran, her feet pounding against the ground as she made her way through the woods. Branches scratched at her skin, and the darkness made it hard to see, but Sarah didn't care. All she knew was that she had to get away, that she couldn't let Ethan catch her. She ran until her lungs burned, until her legs felt like they were going to give out, but she didn't stop. Finally, she saw the lights of the town in the distance. Tears filled her eyes as she stumbled towards them, her mind filled with one thought: freedom. When Sarah made it back to town, she was exhausted, her body battered and bruised. She went straight to the police, telling them everything that had happened. They took her statement, then went to find Ethan. But when they got to the cabin, he was gone. For weeks, Sarah lived in fear, constantly looking over her shoulder, afraid that Ethan would come back for her. But as time passed, and there was no sign of him, she began to slowly rebuild her life. The townspeople rallied around her, offering their support and helping her to heal. Sarah was grateful, but she knew that it would take time for her to fully recover from what she had been through. She started seeing a therapist, someone who helped her work through the trauma, who helped her understand that what had happened wasn't her fault. Slowly, Sarah began to feel like herself again. She began to laugh, to smile, to enjoy the little things in life that she had once taken for granted. But even as she moved forward, there was a part of her that would never forget. A part of her that would always carry the scars of what had happened, both physical and emotional. She knew that she was stronger now, that she had survived something that could have broken her. But she also knew that there were some things that she would never be able to fully forget. Ethan was never found. Some said he had fled the country, while others believed he was hiding somewhere, waiting for the right moment to strike. But Sarah refused to live in fear. She refused to let him control her life any longer. She moved to a new town, far away from the memories of what had happened. She started over, building a new life for herself, one where she was in control. She found a job, made new friends, and even started dating again. But she was different now. Wiser, stronger, more aware of the darkness that could lurk behind a seemingly perfect facade. She was determined to never let anyone have that kind of power over her again. Years passed, and Sarah's life slowly returned to a new kind of normal. She still had moments of doubt, moments where the past threatened to pull her back into the darkness, but she fought against it. She had come too far to let fear control her. She had learned to trust herself again, to listen to her instincts. She knew now that love wasn't about control or possession. It was about respect, about caring for someone in a way that lifted them up, not tore them down. One day, while walking through the park in her new town, Sarah spotted a familiar figure sitting on a bench. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized Ethan. He looked different now, older, worn down by the years, but it was definitely him. For a moment Sarah froze, her old fears threatening to overwhelm her. But then she took a deep breath and walked towards him. She wasn't the same person she had been all those years ago. She was stronger now, and she wasn't going to let him control her anymore. Ethan looked up as she approached, surprise flickering in his eyes. "Sarah," he said, his voice filled with disbelief. Sarah stood tall, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I'm not afraid of you anymore, Ethan," she said firmly. "You don't have power over me. Not anymore." Ethan's expression shifted, a mixture of regret and sadness crossing his face. "I never wanted to hurt you, Sarah," he said softly. "But you did," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "And I won't let you do it again." Without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving Ethan behind. She didn't look back, didn't let herself dwell on the past. She had her whole life ahead of her, a life that she was going to live on her terms. As she walked away, Sarah felt a sense of closure, a sense of peace that she hadn't felt in a long time. She was finally free, free from the chains that had held her down for so long. Because in the end, love wasn't about control or power. It was about freedom, about letting someone be who they were meant to be. And Sarah was finally free to be herself, to live the life she had always deserved. The past would always be a part of her, but it didn't define her. She was stronger now, wiser, and ready to face whatever the future held. Because she knew now that no one would ever have that kind of power over her again. And that was the greatest victory of all.